Hello and welcome to this watercolor painting demonstration of Santorini. Today I'll be showing you a variety of watercolor techniques as I paint this beautiful and iconic Greek island, from wet on wet or wet in wet to dry brush techniques. I'll be sharing many of my tips and tricks for creating hopefully a stunning watercolor seascape scene. As I paint along, I'll be providing full commentary of my thought process and the techniques that I'm using. Now, there's four tricky areas with this painting, with this scene that we've got. First of all, the composition and dealing with these two dominant boats there. They're sort of almost in the middle of the scene. We want to try and think about perhaps making them less large, maybe moving them slightly over to the right, but still trying to connect them with those background cliffs. Secondly, we've got a complex background with the village. The more you look at that village, the more details you're going to see: windows, architectural details, and likewise the cliffs and escarpment behind. The more you look at that, you can see little details, rocky bits, outcrops, the shadows, the actual cracks in the rock as well, coming down to the water's edge. One of those bigger sort of boulders down there as well. Too much detail, and thinking about the value of that background as well, trying to get a sense of depth, pushing it back. We don't want it too bright to bring it forwards. Thirdly, the water. It's all about the water, trying to get the horizon line right, giving us plenty of space for devoting our painting to the water and reflections, and trying to get a realistic feel to the color of the water, the size and shapes of the waves and the reflections. And the fourth area of difficulty, or the fourth challenge with this, are these two boats. Two very different boats, the inflatable on the left, with trying to get the perspective right of that one with the rows of seats in there, 4 rows of seats, and this one on the right, more of a traditional fishing boat. And again, as we zoom in, we see more and more details: ropes, rigging, these reels on the left hand side, fenders, quite a lot of things there to trap us and get us bogged down in too much detail. So hello, I'm Tim Wilmot, a watercolor painter and tutor, producing videos and online workshops to help improve your paintings. And I have here an edited recording that we're going to be diving into very shortly of a live demo I did for my Patreons very recently. What is Patreon? Well, think of it like an online club. It's a community of watercolor painters from all over the world. In fact, Patreon is used by many YouTube creators like me to help get a closer connection with their supporters and followers, and actually share richer information, richer material with them. Your membership subscriptions allow me to cover the costs of creating these YouTube watercolor videos. On Patreon, if you go to patreon.com/Tim Wilmot, TIMWILMOT. There are different membership levels. Here they are, just a few of them here. And these different levels and tiers give you different areas of benefit. There's a lot going on to keep you busy with your painting: exclusive posts by me, posts from other members, an image sharing library, regular online meetups via Zoom as well, sometimes one-on-one sessions with you, ad-free videos from me that are released early, and painting critiques as well, and exclusive live demos like we're about to see. So please check it out if you're interested in getting involved and being part of this watercolor community. Anyway, back to this demo of this lovely Santorini scene. The photo was kindly shared by one of my Patreon members, so thanks very much to that member. And you'll join me as I start describing the typical materials I use for watercolor painting. Those of you that are painting along with me live. Let me just move my source photo out of the way and describe my materials. As per usual, my paper of choice is Saunders Waterford cold press, 140 pounds, 15 inches by 11. The paints I'll describe as I go through, but it's my normal palette, so I'll describe those colours as I go through. Brushes wise, I'm going to be using a largish mop brush, maybe for most of the painting, and a brush that's got a good point and a good edge to it as well. A number of different synthetic round brushes as well. Hopefully some of them have got a good point also. And a rigger brush will also come in handy for some of the rigging and ropes and frames around those boats. So a rigger brush there, good point to it. Yeah, and well, of course, first of all, my initial drawing. So let's just have a recap of the scene. I've mentioned already about these two dominant boats. They are, in the photo, they are quite big, and with the lens of the photo that took this, possibly the fronts there look a little bit larger than they are in reality. I'm sure if we were there on the day, they would be less prominent. So try and move those boats just a little bit to the right. Getting the waterline correct. Now I think with the photo, it's about right. It's above the center line. I want to give myself enough, if I just move my pencil there, I want to give myself enough space below that for the boats. The boats have got to connect to the background, particularly that, look at that mast there. I don't want them isolated sort of on their own. I want to just move them up a little bit and connect with the background. And then with that water's edge being high enough, I've got enough space for some reflections for these boats. I'm not going to bother with this little, I'm not sure what it is, whether it's a jetty or some kind of floating platform there. I'm not going to bother with this small inflatable on the left-hand side. There may be some of these fenders I'll dispense with, but most other things I'm going to try and include. Don't get tied up with the detail in the background. The more you look at those cliffs, the more you see little outcrops and these level horizontals as well. That we discussed on Pat Chat, this road going up from the village, or a little bridge here with these arches and these sort of buttress type supports. Too much detail in my mind. Looks like the road sort of zigzags, goes up from the top of the village to there and then up there. Maybe we'll just try and sneak in a little thin line there just to give the impression of that road going away from the village. That's my plan. I haven't done a thumbnail sketch. I haven't done a value sketch. I'm just going to go straight into it. I discussed yesterday on Pat Chat my kind of line of thinking on this one, and I'm pretty much going to stick to that plan. Okay, well, I'm going to be doing the drawing with a 3B pencil, fairly soft, and give me a decent sort of hard dark line that I can hopefully follow and won't be obliterated with the watercolor wash. First thing for me is getting in that water's edge, and fairly horizontal. Now you don't need to be too precise with the straightness of this line. A little bit of and hopefully you can see this, I'm just going to get in a little bit of that. You can see the way I'm drawing this. It's a dotted line almost, because we may be cutting across that with some of the verticals from the boat. So fairly horizontal. All right. Over on the right-hand side here, there's lots of sort of rocks and things going on. So we definitely don't need to be straight over there. Here, there's this sort of cafe restaurant right on the edge. Looks lovely. I've never been there myself, but looks like a lovely little cafe restaurant there. And then on the left-hand side, we can see there's more of a sort of open area. Next, the rough outline of the village going up the hill on that left-hand side. As I say, it's a sort of triangle with a shorter side there, and then slightly longer side there, and then the base here, water's edge. Right at the top of the triangle, we've got that church. Now, just going to draw an outline for the edge of this village. So I've got in the rough shape first of all, there, there, there. And now just, and you don't need to be too precise with this, but just getting the impression of the village and these different rooftops. There's quite a few curved semicircular rooftops there. Not sure if that's typical for the region. And then there's the top of the cafe there. Various other levels going up from that. You can see some steps here. I'm in danger of looking at too much detail. And then there is the road going up to the right, top right corner, a little bit of sky there. The top of the cliffs and a few little horizontal cracks in the rocks. Yeah, I think that's enough detail for that one. For the village, enough detail there. There are lots of different colours in that village. Quite bright at the top with the bell tower, and there's a sort of light bluish greenish group of houses here. There's this sort of orangey colour here. We'll try and put in a few sort of weak colours. I don't want to be too strong, don't want to be too detailed, otherwise it's going to come forward. I want to try and get a sense of depth in there. Next, very important bit now in the drawing, those two dominant boats. And they're two very different boats. There's this sort of inflatable sort of pleasure boat. You can see these 4 rows of seats there, and the guy steering the boat will be there, or woman or whoever steering the boat there, and then we've got the fishing boat, totally different on the right hand side, and the complexity of, there's 3 reels, 1, 2, 3 reels, bits and pieces on the top there, and sonar and navigation stuff, and these fenders. Yeah, so quite a lot going on, but try and get them positioned right. For me, I want to get them sort of there and there, and they're pointing in opposite directions, which I think is quite nice, rather than pointing in the same direction. The left-hand one is pointing that way, and the right-hand one is pointing slightly that way, so that's quite nice. I'll start with the left-hand one first. Let's get that one in. Starting from the back and where the steering bits and pieces are. And then the front of the boat. Don't think I've ever painted or drawn an inflatable boat like this before. Normally I've gone for the more traditional, like the boat on the right. That would be more in my comfort zone. Now there's a little bit of perspective going on here with the right hand side of that inflatable part and getting that curve right at the end. Gets a little bit wider as it comes towards us and then up to the front, sort of crossing over the bow of the boat, and then just a little bit of a sort of triangle of the front of the boat showing through. The 4 rows of seats inside the boat. Like that. Don't worry about the frame on the top. We'll paint that in with a little bit of white paint, but we're going to be painting around this big shape here. On the left hand side there's quite an attractive sort of cylindrical fender. Pop that in. There are various ropes and things going this way to the bottom, to the foreground. Ignore the left hand side. Right, fishing boat on the right. Cabin. Front of the boat. It is of course pointed, but the way we're looking at it, it's almost horizontal, like a straight line. The actual bow of the boat there, and then let's get in this tricky left-hand side with the... Oh, Betty, can you hear us now? Be great if she can finally hear us. Right, these reels. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to paint those in, but I'm drawing them in anyway. I suppose from a drawing point of view that they're not too difficult because we're looking at them head on, so just like the 2 sides and then the sort of drum in the middle. Let's get in the left hand side. These fenders, there's about 3 fenders I can see. There's a large roundish one. I'll not bother with the one on the right because that would be too much on that right hand side. But if your boats are a little bit more to the left, or if you've got a wider dimension paper, you could probably get in this fender here. Looks quite attractive to have that on the right hand side. Me, I run out of space. Don't want to do it. Window for the cabin around about there. There we are, those 2 boats. I think they look all right. There's a sort of reddish line here. It's quite dark, this boat. And as I mentioned on Pat Chat, the transition from the hull to the water, it's almost a similar value. The boat's darker, but there's a smooth transition, gradual transition from the darkness of that boat to the reflections. Back to inflatable. Sorry to hop around here. Let's get in this line that's going across the middle of that inflatable bit. I'm not going to include any figures. It is rather tempting to put in a figure in here. I'll stick to my original plan. Right. For me, there's a little bit of a gap here. It's just crying out for a small boat in that little space there, which there is in the source photo, but I'm just going to make it a little bit larger and maybe make it look like a fishing boat rather than like one of these, more of a traditional fishing boat. The position for this boat, fairly close to the shore, I think. And shall I have it pointing that way or that way? Let's have it, what do you reckon? Actually, let's have it pointing into the shore, over to the left. Again, think about connections, connecting it with the shore behind, with the cabin there. So that's the hull. There's the cabin. There are other little boats, bits and pieces. Over to the right-hand side, from the middle over the right-hand side. We'll paint those in or leave them as lighter bits of paper. So paint around them to reveal those boats. So not doing anything on the left. I've got a bit of a space here. Shall I put something in there? No, I think it'll be all right. Back to the village, just making sure I've got enough detail in there to guide me on the painting, but not too much detail that I get wrapped up with all the sort of windows and doorways and levels. I just want to create the impression of the village and down to the shoreline there. There we go. It might sort of look as if it's standing out a bit too much now, but all this is going to be behind is going to be a little bit darker, a little bit warmer, a little bit darker. Finally, let's just get in that mast, or that short sort of mast. I'm not sure if it's part of the sonar or navigation equipment on that boat, but it's quite a sort of prominent little white mast there, which very nicely allows us to connect to the background cliffs. Right, I think that's me done. I've got in the main elements, the main objects: village, sky, two main boats, bit of fenders and so on there. Notice the way I was drawing, quite a lot of sort of dashes and spaces left, so it just give me a little bit more of a flexibility when I come to the painting stage to decide whether I'm going to paint up to that line or go over it. And not too much detail, all right, just describing the scene with as fewer marks as possible before we go on to some painting. Right, are there any questions? Any questions? No questions. I'll just go back to chat just in case anyone has popped in a question in there. Right. Okay. Well, let me start with our wash. My plan with the painting. Working from the top, going downwards, starting with the sky, then the cliffs. While that's wet, layer in put in some darker values for the shadows on the cliffs, not too much detail. Then the village, then the sea, paint around these boats, bit of negative painting. That's going to be quite a tricky bit to paint around these different shapes here. And then probably I will then be adding a little bit more detail to the boats and the reflections of those boats as well, before going into final stages to add in a bit of detail like windows and details on the rocks and boats and so on. Right, starting with my, there's a little bit of dirty paint on that brush, not too clean. Starting with my medium-sized mop brush, a good brush that has a point to it and a good edge, all right, which will be useful for painting around things. Start with that sky. Immediately then after going with the mountains. We'll get a bit of a soft edge on that. Don't want a hard edge up there, really. And this sky is such a small part of the overall composition. Bit of cobalt blue, bit of cerulean blue. Cobalt, cerulean. Which might a little bit of a classic combination for me. Half cerulean, half cobalt for a sky. I don't know why, I just seem to settle on that combination. Make sure those two are well and truly mixed together and it's not too watery, not too thick, and get that in there. Wash the brush off. I've got my water container over to the right hand side and pick up our cliffs. For me, my light red here, English oxide, is quite a good colour. A little bit of burnt yellow, but it's quite a sort of reddish brown, really. All right, and then go in with that colour. And notice my brush mark, my brush direction sort of in alternate directions, which might help in getting a bit of the texture of the rocks as well when I do that. So that light red, bit of burnt sienna. And there's sort of subtle variations in values here, dark there, light there. All right, which might work quite well for us. A little bit of a line there for that road that's going up the hillside. And then some careful painting around this church and the other side of the road. Just picked up a little bit of green now, just detected a tiny bit of green, and then continue on down this left-hand side, that left-hand side of the village, like that, and then back over on the right-hand side of the village. Keep working this, don't let it dry out. It is a little bit cooler in places, so I've just picked up a little bit of cobalt in one or two places, and then just continue down right hand side of the village. It's a flattish building there, bit of an incline, more of that bluish building. Doesn't matter, there's little bits of paper left unpainted. They could be boulders and things. There are a few little rocks catching the light. And down to the lower buildings. And looks like there's a little bit of a pathway going up the hillside just above the shoreline. Maybe we're just getting a little bit of a slither of light in there to depict that. Now, as I come down to the water's edge, I'm just going to not go straight, but add in a jagged sort of line like that, because there are a few boats on that side, and we're just sort of painting around those. There's rocks here, bits of light hitting the tops of them. There we are. Now, there are some darker parts to these rocks. I'm just picking up a little bit of, ultramarine blue and not too strong here, but just in places, particularly around some lighter areas. So as this surface is still quite damp, we're going to get some softer edges appearing. Not too much, and just a few little, I think the light's coming from the right hand side, so a bit of shadow on the left. Will work quite well. There. I'm just smoothing out this line here because I think it's just a little bit too hard a line. So I'm just sort of lifting off a tiny bit with my fingertips just to get that soft edge back again. And depending on the humidity where you are, that will obviously dictate the drying time here. There, I think that's enough. Don't want to put too much detail into that, otherwise it would detract from some of the other focal points. Right, the village. Stick with the same brush, and there's a lot of light blue in this village. The shadow on the sides of the buildings. Let's start at the top and start at the top where the church is. And then almost like a greeny blue with the building below that. So with this brush, I'm just really using the side of the brush to create almost quite a few sort of geometric shapes. Coming down. Right in the middle of the village, there's a few more, almost looks like retaining walls or something, back to this sort of rock colour that we had earlier. Like that. A bit more of the blue for this left-hand side. And these buildings will look more building-like when we add in just a few little windows. Now we're almost to the shoreline on this left-hand side here, and I'm just picking up, so we're down to here now. It gets quite darker there. Not too dark. Almost down to the water's edge, and there's a little sort of platform here, the harbour wall, I guess, there. And then there's this sort of yellowish, orangish structure in the middle, which to me looks quite an unusual colour for Greece. Not very sort of Greek-like, but nonetheless is quite attractive. Just above the cafe, the restaurant on the water's edge. Like that. Buildings just fill in this space here. Something greyish. On this immediate side, there's another one of these curved rooftops. It sort of disappears. On the right hand side of that orangey building, and now we're going over to this right hand corner. The cafe itself, don't worry about all these tables and chairs. There must be about 20 or maybe 30 tables and chairs there. For me, that's too much detail. I'm just going to go with something quite dark below the roof, below this covering here. Not too dark. You don't want it like black. You want it just the right kind of value to give the impression of that recess in the cover. So rather than using black, I've used a bit of burnt sienna and ultramarine. I tend to mix my darks up here, this top mixing area. So not too dark, ultramarine blue, burnt sienna. This is where a good point and a good edge comes in handy. So a good straight edge across the top there. Over to that right hand side. Might look like a total mess at the moment, but hopefully we'll put it together with a few more details in that building. Right, let's continue down to the water's edge on this side here. So we've done the rocks on that side. There's a sort of bit of a harbour wall there, darker, then it's sort of more sort of whitewashed wall there. So a little bit darker there. We're going up to the cabin of my improvised fishing boat, and then just paint around a few of the tops of some imaginary craft in there, in that gap. Then over to the middle, just beyond the middle there. Right, I think so far so good. Done that top third. Next is going to be the water. Now the water, getting in the underlying colours, look at the underlying colours. Light coming from the right, bit of a sparkle on this right hand side. For me, the water looks a little bit lighter there, a little bit darker here, lighter here because of the light hitting his buildings, maybe a bit of reflection from those, but it also looks a little bit more green, a little bit more greenish on that left hand side, and then a little bit more bluish on the right hand side. Okay, so just think about the base color, not the darker wave reflections, just the base color here. I'll just check and see if there's any questions so far. Okay, don't think there's any questions. Right, water then. Start with the left-hand side, gradually go over to the right. My green will be, let's just make a bit of space here, will be this cobalt turquoise, possibly a little bit of wheat viridian green, just to add a bit more green to it. So cobalt turquoise, bit of that viridian green. Combination of those two should be just right. And I might also with this get a little bit darker towards the bottom of the page, so start quite light up there. Bit of painting around that boat on the left. And then a little bit darker as we come down, so thicker paint. Up to the left-hand side of the pleasure boat here. Bit of cutting around those seats. Over the bow. And then down to the bottom. And cut around that fender up to the left-hand side of the bow. And continue on down the left-hand side, down to that bottom corner. Again, my brush strokes are similar to the way I did the cliffs, trying to create a little bit of subtle variation of tone and values in there. Gradually come over we're now going into more of a cobalt blue. Up to the bow of the inflatable. A lot of this will be hidden by the reflections. It's quite useful, these boats being fairly close together, because that gives me a nice sort of opportunity to pause here and use that as a break. Paint around the fender. Now, as we come over, there's a few little sparkles beginning to appear here. So I'm using the side of my brush to quickly go across the paper just to reveal a little bit of the paper if I can. So not so much paint on the brush here. Let's just fill in this middle bit. And again we'll just leave a few little white spaces where boats are, distant boats. Paint around the back of this inflatable. Up to the left-hand edge of that mast, that white mast, and then down to the gap between these two boats. Like that, and then something quite light over to the right, and this is where I need to think about the little speckles of light coming, touching the surface. Down to the cabin. So my brush, I'm using more horizontal strokes. Maybe less of the white stuff down towards the foreground. Got a bit of that part of my wash has dried, coming down to it. I've got to be very careful where I join the two up. If I go over the dry bit, I'm going to get a nasty dark line, which I don't want. So I'll just use that dry brush to go up to it. Maybe we can mask some of this with some darker reflections later on. Right, I think that is the main sort of wash stage, trying to cover as much of the paper as I can, but painting around those areas that are going to be left either light or they're going to be painted in a more detailed way, a more careful way. Which so for example the boats, but leaving white the different parts of the village that are catching the light, rooftops and so on, the bits of the boats in the bay, and obviously the bits of the boats that will be left bright. Are there any questions at all? Is anybody painting along with me? Those of you on Patreon watching live? Anybody painting along with me? Barb normally does. Oh, Fauzia. Okay. All right. Right, I'm just going to make sure this is dry now. Next step. I think we'll add a little bit more detail to the rocks and the village. Just a few little lines. Smaller brush with this. Smaller brush to add in those details. Thicker consistency of paint as well. Almost a little bit of dry brush marks in some places, but just to add a bit of definition and form to these. So I need a smaller round brush. Any will do. Shall I use this one or this one? Oh, let's go with this one. Right, just a small round brush. What is this one? This is a Pro Art. I think it's a number 4 Pro Art. All right, should give us a nice-ish point. Hills, first of all, just a few little darker little cracks in the rock, just to make it a bit more rock-like. Not too dark, again. Almost dry brush marks here. Just got a bit of sort of dirty paint up there at the top area, so just utilize a bit of that. Alizarin crimson, burnt umber, neutral tint, not too strong, and also not too much water. And then these horizontal lines that we've got. There's really not too much water on my brush at all. that's that sort of pathway. Right above the shoreline. Some of these sort of fissures and horizontals are a little bit darker in places. And then down to the water's edge. On that left-hand side. Really, don't get too hung up with the colour that you're using here. Right. Just make sure my hand, this is still quite damp for me. Make sure my right hand, I'm not smudging my work too much. Into the village, some doorways and windows. Just a few, just to sort of give the impression of something going on there. There's the church. There's that sort of bluish building. Top right corner. Orange building. Might be a little bit too dark with some of those lines. Some of those little marks. Got to be careful not to make them stand out a bit too much by going too dark. Just picked up something cooler here too. Give the impression of some of these horizontals. Right, a few. And of course, there's lots of people on the quayside, but they're so far away. The size of the figures, they're sort of about that sort of size. And well, we could put in a few. Again, not too dark. Just a few little marks here and there to depict figures. Water's edge. A little bit darker over to the rocks. careful with these rocks, the cliffs. Don't put too much effort into them, and I'm slowly potentially adding a bit too much detail into them. There are a few in the village, there are a few posts, a few poles. There we are. Right. I think that's pretty much done the village. Hopefully it's looking a little bit more village-like now. There we go. Not too many windows, just to give the impression of, in the distance, the tiers of those different, the levels of those different buildings coming down to the shoreline. I will, with a little bit of white paint later on, I might just add in a few tables and chairs and some of the posts, just sort of supporting that top canopy there. Right, next. Well, let's do these middle ground boats here, and just a start of just a few little darker reflections, little darker paint. I'm going to be using this brush here for that, and a sort of sideways motion, just lightly touching the paper, and hopefully we should get some fairly realistic reflection shapes occurring. Right. Starting from the left hand side, a darker value to what we're using before, but same combination. Phrygian green, cobalt green. I think that would be quite a good combination. Now, in the distance, the waves are going to be quite narrow, and just a few of them. All right, so I'm just sort of dragging this brush and the sea conditions are a little quite choppy. We've got a little bit of a reflection there. Of course, these distant boats, there won't be too many reflections below them, but just a little bit of a reflection from some of those. As I come further down, we can go a little bit thicker with these reflections, and also making sure that I go over that left-hand border so I don't have a sort of uncomfortable edge around it. This is a little bit laborious, this section, so apologies if this is a bit boring to watch. But it's quite important getting, not covering the whole area, I think, just leaving a few little subtle gaps here and there. Remembering to keep the waves quite narrow in the distance. That's why a good point is useful. And darker, thicker, as we come down to the bottom left-hand corner. Cobalt green, viridian green, a little bit of neutral tint, go darker. Up to the boat, and we're going to go a little bit darker with the reflections of the boat, but we're just sort of meeting it. All right, just go up to that boat. This will all be darker reflections of the boat in there. Darker, thicker there. And then the reflections in the middle here. They're going a bit bluer, a bit more of an ultramarine blue, I reckon, here. And a little bit of burnt umber, just so it's not too blue. And we're just putting a few little reflections in there. And they'll get fewer and fewer as we go over to the right hand side where the light is coming from. Right, just a few over here. This is where a good point of the brush works. And I'm just using my little finger to lever the brush up just at the right sort of distance from the paper and just really scratching the surface with these marks. Sometimes the more random you are, the more realistic they turn out to be. Again, a little bit thicker with these reflections as we come down to the foreground here. There we go. Hopefully a little bit more sea-like, bit of the sense of the movement in the water. We're still on the boats. We need to make, let's go down to a smaller brush here. Go back to that little round brush I was using earlier. A little bit of shadow now on the boats and the hulls. So not too dark. Something like that would be all right. Let's start with this fishing boat here. Light coming from the left. Have a little bit of slither of light. On the top of the boat and just beyond the cabin there, so it's pointing that way. And the hull. There we are, and the others as well, just a little bit of shadow one side. Not sure which way that boat's pointing, but you don't need to worry too much about those shapes. They're basically almost like rectangles in the distance. One there, and then a few more over there. There we are. We're going later on with some darker lines, some markings on the boat, some water lines, but that should be all right. Well, we're down to the main boats now. The main boats. Let me just check and see if there's any questions. Nope. Okay. Right, main boats. Main boats. Let's do the left one first of all. Brush for this. Let's just stick with my long round brush here. Now, the colour, the value of the darker areas here is not as dark as the water, so I've got to be a bit careful here. I'll use this colour that I've got in the middle that I use for the reflections, and I think that's all right there. Now I've got some pencil lines on the right hand side. I'll rub those out later on. Come down. Bit of a warmer shadow. At the back to a cooler shadow for the seating. Right, the furthest. That's the next one. A little bit intricate, this. Sorry, this is a little bit boring to watch. Let's get in the next row. A little bit of light hitting the top, and then the last one. There we go. Next, the greyish inflatable part of this boat. Grey. Let's have a little bit of burnt sienna, bit of ultramarine blue, bit of white gouache, or a bit of white paint. Give that sort of greyish colour, chalky greyish colour. A bit more blue in that. That's better. Again, it's not as dark as that, so hopefully this will be fairly accurate. This needs to be a little bit grayer. And then a little bit darker, not too dark, a little bit darker at the front here. Soft edge into the light. Darker, oh, it's very dark there. Yeah. Dark on that right hand side of that fender. Dark on this very left hand edge where it sort of goes over the front of the boat, and then drag it over and up the right hand side. There we go. Up there. Like that. Now there is the, oops, little hairs come out of the brush, and another one as well. Don't worry about that. The front of the boat, a little bit lighter. Down to the water's edge, up that side there. And some reflections. I'll go back to my bigger brush. It's got that nice sort of point for doing these wave marks, these reflection marks. Viridian green, cobalt green, bit of neutral tint. Cobalt green, viridian green, neutral tint. Cobalt green, viridian green. Yeah, I think that's about it. Up to the hull of the boat, you need to go quite dark in the gap between the two boats. Cobalt green, viridian green, neutral tint. Well and truly mixed up, and sort of waves are going between the boats. They're going at the front, they're going a little bit up there, and then they a bit of a peak, and then they sort of recede over to the left hand side. That's what I'm sensing anyway between those two. I might just fill in this little gap here. Make sure it's a little bit more solid towards the hull. There we go. Fishing boat. We'll add some more details when that's all dried a little bit more. Fishing boat next. Back to my sort of medium. Round, long round brush. Right, the cabin. Well, on the photo it is quite a sort of light blue. I'll go with that, I think. So a little bit of cobalt blue, a little bit of cerulean. maybe a little bit of cobalt green as well. Now the top of the boat I want to keep fairly light. There are some little bits and pieces going on up the top there. And let's go down. Is that too dark? Might be just a little bit too dark. Keep it fairly light. Coming to the front of the boat now. Bit of a horizontal line, and then the right hand side. There we go. Dark hull, very dark. Neutral tint, ultramarine blue, burnt umber, and colour in this hull down to the water's edge, around that fender. And this is where, with this boat, I want to get a bit of a smooth transition from the boat to the reflections. So continue first of all down to the water, and now back to my other brush. Pick up the cobalt green, viridian green, that dark stuff, and well, just filling it around these fenders again. Remembering the sort of imaginary contour of the water. Up to the hull, and sort of they just sort of merge together quite nicely. To the point where you can't really see the water's edge of the boat, the waterline of the boat. Here we are. Now, these fenders, we're getting into a bit of the detail now of the boat. The fenders will just need to be darkened a little bit. There we are, a bit of a soft edge, not too hard a edge around the outside. Back to my smaller brush, let's get into some details of the this left-hand boat while that's drying a bit. Just a few details, like I did with the houses. Not too much water, bit of, well, something dark in the palette, alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, burnt umber, neutral tint, and just sort of picking up on a few details, the ropes here. A few little details on the inflatable. I'll just get in a little bit of the canopy of this boat as well. Just a few little verticals there. There we are. When I've got this dark paint, let's add in a few more darks to these more distant boats. Just make sure, look how dirty my fingers are. Be careful. Right. Fishing boat there. A bit of a water line, and then some of the other boats as well. There we are. This boat now. The window on the front of the cabin, which I can just about see my, oh, it's quite dark, I can just about see my pencil line showing through. These reels on the left-hand side, these are a bit tricky. Let's get in the lighter wood bits first. There we are. And the structure of there's a top sort of frame for this fishing boat, which we'll get in with the rigger brush in a minute. Right, is there anything else I can do with the darker brush? Ooh, some red markings for this boat. They're quite attractive. Let's go really bright red with a bit of cadmium red on this one. Bit of cad red. Not too much water, small brush, and starting with the top of the boat. And then there's another smaller line just below it. It's almost horizontal. As this dries, it will go a little bit darker, so we might sort of miss it a little bit. Is there any red elsewhere? You know, a few little bits of red for the people. Next. Now, I'm just going to use my rubber to... We're going to add in a few highlights here with a thin brush and some white gouache. But first of all, let me just use my rubber, and where I can, just rub out in a few places those pencil lines, just to hopefully reveal a little bit more of the white of the paper. Just a few places there. And this boat here, and make sure the paint is dry before you do this. There and there, and there, and there. Okay. Excuse me, I'm just going to blow all this little debris away. There we go. Right, rigger brush. These fine lines, this framework here of the covering going over those boats. Maybe just a few little lines for some ropes coming into wherever they're being tethered to. Now, I've got here, well, I've got some Naples, a light Naples yellow gouache. If you don't have that, well, just this. Got some dirty paint in there. Some of this white gouache, all right, which those of you that see me before, I use fairly regularly. So make sure I've got the right consistency, not too watery, not too dry, sort of somewhere in the middle. All right, somewhere in the middle. And then, oh, that's just too much. And then just look at the, too much again. That should be right. And then just, now I didn't really draw these in. That needs to be brighter. And then just where, basically the sides of the boats. There's this one. It's going to serve to connect. And then on this side, wow, the top of that canopy is almost going to be in line with the pathway behind. Doesn't matter. There we go. Might not show up too much. I think I might need to add in a few darker lines behind that. While I've got this paint, just adding a few little supports for that cafe, and maybe just the impression of a few little tables and things going on in there. And there are a few little buoys in the water, little floating balls. I think I might just get in some fresh white paint. That's a little bit too dirty down there. Clean my brush. Still use this rigger brush, and some fresh white gouache here. That's better. Just a few little white sparkles down that bottom right corner. And don't overdo it with the white paint. But we just need a few little strong white lines, verticals. There we go. And some rope. So there's a good line coming from here. And then maybe another one coming across there, and then a few coming from this right-hand boat, like that. I think I'm nearly done. With some of these white lines, I'll add a little bit of darkness behind them with the rigger brush. And not too dark. There we are, a bit of darkness on the left-hand side of some of these lines. And maybe a little bit of darkness of that one, and a little bit of darkness down that one. Just makes them stand out a bit more. There we are, a bit more sort of rope-like. There. Finally, just a bit of darkness against that white mast. Need to add in the reel of that cable. There we go. I think I'm done. As I normally do at the end of my demo videos, a little bit of a self-critique session to see how my painting went, just to summarize the whole painting process. Santorini Harbour then, relatively pleased with the result as regards the composition. If I could be a little bit critical of myself, in the middle ground, the transition of the sea from that greenish turquoise colour to the blue colour, maybe a little bit too harsh there. Looks, let me just zoom out, looks sort of okay in the foreground, but I could have had a smoother transition from that more greener, that greenish colour to the bluish colour there, a bit of a smoother transition. It's just a small little bit. I look at it, I think, yes, I could have done a little bit better there. And it actually probably stands out a little bit more because of the darker blue waves on that right-hand side. Pleased with the boats though, simplification of those, simplification of the village behind, and the rocks as well, the soft edge of the sky and the top of the cliffs there, some distant boats as well, the wave shapes I'm relatively pleased with. Maybe could have done a few more, but in the live demo, there's only so much you can do. You've got to keep the demo going and try and not sort of get bogged down in too much detail, but relatively pleased with those wave shapes and sizes. So thanks for watching. Thanks again very much to my Patreon members to help me make this all possible. and I'll catch up with you on the next video.